What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Welcome. We are here with some more NFL DFS picks and lineup advice, this time for the Black Friday edition. First ever Black Friday Showdown slate, single game, FanDuel and DraftKings, Miami Dolphins, New York Jets. Welcome. I am Brian Jester, co-founder here at Occupy Fantasy, single game $1 million winner. This is a live Q&A. We'll be here until about 1:30 p.m. Eastern. Weird timing with Thanksgiving yesterday and with this showdown slate at 3 p.m. today. So couldn't do a pre-recorded video for you. So I figured we'd hop on here live, answer your questions, and go through the typical routine that we do for these showdown slates. If you're new, welcome. What we're going to do, talk about the injuries and now inactives that impact the slate, how that changes the player pool, and who we're going to pick for our contest. Low risk lineup construction tips for 50-50s, double ups, head to heads, who some of the core plays are for those contests. And then for high risk contests, GPPs, leagues, satellites, the strategies you need to get to the top of those contest leaderboards, we'll cover those as well and answer your questions along the way. Already got some questions in here. Eagles, JP, Tehran, let me know if I mispronounced that. Mr. Burden. Lots of talk about the Jets winning today, taking the points. JP talking about how overweight should we be on a 6K quarterback. Let's talk about it. All right, so let's start with the injuries and the inactives and the benchings that impact the slate. And then we start with Miami side. Devon Achane, rookie running back, was activated off injured reserve last week, played a handful of snaps, tweaked his knee, left the game, didn't return. I know because I played him heavily in DFS last week upon his return. And he is not going to play today per national reports this morning, which means they have Raheem Mostert to lead the way. They have Jeff Wilson because Salvon Ahmed is also an injured reserve. So Jeff Wilson will be the number 2 running back, and Jeff Wilson is $1,800 on DraftKings. And then they also elevated Darrington Evans. Yes, that Darrington Evans from former Tennessee fame, from Chicago just a few weeks ago when Khalil Herbert was down. Darrington Evans is going to be the running back 3 today. He is not in the player pool on either site, so we don't have to worry about that. But he will take some snaps more than likely. But either way, that leaves Jeff Wilson as one of the most popular players on the slate, the most popular value on DraftKings by far at just $1,800 in his running back 2 role. Now, you do remember, we had a similar situation when Wilson was activated off injured reserve. He was just $200 on that showdown slate, was massively owned, barely played. They did have Ahmed in that game. This is a little bit of a different equation. We do expect him to see more work today. Mike McDaniel's comments about Wilson's preparation and just the injury ebb and flow and how Wilson is ready for anything makes it sound like he will get more work today. Going to be the most popular player below the kickers and defenses, even probably more popular than them. Durham Smythe, their tight end, $1,600, did not play last week. We think he's going to play. We'll find out here in, 30 minutes or so. If he's out, Julian Hill, their rookie tight end, he ran 21 routes last week. So keep in mind, he's minimum price if Durham Smythe is indeed out. If Smythe's in, we expect a full workload for him, run most of the routes at the position for Miami. Now, on the Jets side, you probably have heard, if you've been paying attention, Zach Wilson has been benched. $8,200 would have been. Tim Boyle, probably the only quarterback in NFL history to have more interceptions than touchdowns in college, yet still play in the NFL. That is Tim Boyle for you. Has played 3 games with the Lions. Unsurprisingly, in those 3 games, also threw more interceptions than touchdowns. Not that great, but he knows the system, so he's getting the start here over Trevor Siemian. DraftKings asleep at the wheel a bit. FanDuel did not have this issue. Go to FanDuel. We see Tim Boyle is $11K, your typical terrible quarterback pricing, whereas DraftKings left him as the backup quarterback price at just $6K. So he's going to project a little bit better than the average terrible quarterback on DraftKings. Normally they would be $8K, like Zach Wilson, $8,200. But $6K makes him a little more appealing. He is terrible, but he is a quarterback, going to project for double-digit points more than likely, so he's in play in most contest types. And Tay says Tehran, so close enough. Got you. Thank you. Appreciate that. Matt says, where's your water? Figured you'd be dehydrated today. Don't worry, buddy. We got the Waterloo on tap. Let's get a drink in. Thank you. So, talked about the injuries. And also, Alan Lazard. We got news maybe 20 minutes before I went live here. Alan Lazard, who, to the dismay of many Jets fans, has been playing and dropping passes. He's going to be inactive today. He actually ran the 3rd most routes last week. That was a bit of a demotion where he's been running the 2nd most routes for the majority of the season. He's actually going to be inactive today, which leads me into this next very important point about New York Jets usage. Report that came out last week and how it's actually impacted how they're using their players. So I think it was Ian Rappaport came out and said a week or week and a half ago that the Jets are looking forward to using more of their younger players on offense, get them more reps, evaluate them. Specifically, they named a couple guys, Xavier Gipson. They named Jason Brownlee, preseason legend, more so training camp legend. Irvin Charles, Jeremy Ruckert, the tight end. Look at the prices of all these guys, by the way. And Izzy Abandakanda. I tried to type in Izzy. His name's Israel. Israel Abandakanda, only $1,200. So we get reports, right, that they're going to use younger players. Sure, we get these types of reports all the time. Jets actually put this into action. So I'm just going to list off some of their usage participation in last week's Week 11 game to let you know that the Jets mean business when they're talking about this, and they certainly mean business after making Lazard inactive today. So for the Jets receivers, Garrett Wilson last week ran 41 routes, no change to his role. Xavier Gipson ran 35 routes for an $800 receiver. That is, no matter if I'm throwing them the ball, that's impressive. Lazard did run 27, so that's 27 routes if they get the same volume. That open up. Jason Brownlee ran 15. That's going to increase. And then Irvin Charles just ran a couple. He's $200. He'll get more as well. I'm imagining Brownlee moves into that Lazard role, that 20 to 25 snap range. Irvin Charles gets 10 to 15. All these guys are going to be under 20%. Xavier Gipson might push 20%, but certainly Brownlee and Charles for those of you playing large field GPPs. At tight end, Jeremy Ruckert, who again was a training camp star, lots of glowing reports about his usage in training camp and in the preseason games. And their tight end routes last week, Conklin ran 24, Ruckert all the way up to 17. CJ Uzama, the vet, only ran one route last week. So big jump there as well. The vet Uzama was leapfrogged by Jeremy Ruckert. Ruckert is again $400. Again, keep in mind, these are on the Jets, who are underdogs with Tim Boyle at quarterback, but they all are mispriced nonetheless. Then at running back, Breece Hall still played 36 snaps, in line with what he's been playing. Has been playing more third down since Michael Carter left. Dalvin Cook got 14 snaps, and then Abandakanda, the running back 3, got 10 snaps. And he's an explosive guy, a guy we played heavily in preseason DFS. I think it was the Hall of Fame game. We recommended playing him heavily, and did decent work with his touches in preseason. So he's going to get 10-plus snaps again today, more than likely. So it is the youth revolution in New York for the Jets. And these are guys we have to consider for different contest types based on how much risk we need to take. Notum says in the chat, is 20K too much to leave on the table? This could be a pretty crazy slate with salary usage. 20K is probably too much, but the sentiment is recognized nonetheless. Jethro says, is Dolphins defense going to be chalk at captain? Not necessarily chalk, but they will be higher than most defenses have been this year. If you look at the Dolphins defense, let's get them in here. Dolphins defense are $5,200. They're going to be 25, 30% plus, maybe 40% in some contests. The only reason I think that they might not be super, super popular, like 40% plus, is because of all the values that we do have, and this mid-range just dries up a bit if you try to jam in the Miami studs with those cheaper guys. But they're going to be popular nonetheless. We have them 5 to 10% at captain. So from the average defense, yes, that's pretty chalky. So just keep that in mind. We're not the only ones with the idea that Tim Boyle sucks, and this could be a slaughtering on Miami side. So as Double J says, Jets offensive line is really banged up. So Mekhi Becton's going to be out there left tackle, but they do get Dwayne Brown back, who was on injured reserve. They're getting him back, so a little bit of a swap there. But they've been dealing with guys in and out of the lineup, which is never great. The offensive line performance is more of a sum of the parts situation than individual. So not a great look. They do get Dwayne Brown back, so it definitely helps a little bit. All right, let's see here. All right, we mentioned all the injuries, inactives, new usage for the Jets. Let's talk about low-risk contests. So 50-50s, double-ups, head-to-heads. Again, if you guys have questions, throw them in the chat, and I will answer them for you. But I'm going to try not to give out a lineup here on screen. And I'm just going to say as little as I can to get across the point that this is one of the easiest low-risk lineups you can make of all the showdown slates we've been playing this year, right? So for Miami, we want to get the core guys in. Scroll up. Core guys are Tyreek, Tua, Raheem Mostert, so the greatest wide receiver one this season, quarterback, running back. Mostert's going to lead the way. Breece Hall, running back, going to lead the way. Tim Boyle, 6K quarterback, is a great low-risk play despite his ineptitude. At least $2,800 left per player at the captain spot. Can we really do that? Oh, but there's a running back there that's going to be running back 2 and extremely chalk, and he is $2,700. I'm going to clear this. Those are your 6 core guys. Tyreek, Tua, Mostert, Jeff Wilson, Breece Hall, Tim Boyle. You can make it work. If you don't want to captain Jeff Wilson, you can take out Boyle or Hall, whatever it may be. But those are the 6 guys you want to get in. Maybe you want to fit in Dolphins defense, one of those other guys. Sure, that's up to you. But it really doesn't get much easier for 50-50s, double-ups, and head-to-heads on DraftKings. Now, for FanDuel, that is not the case because they extremely priced up. Tyreek Hill is 17.5, Tua 15.5, Mostert 14. If you tried to fit them in, $6,500 left per player. We know that is a losing strategy to jam 3 studs in FanDuel low-risk contests, so we can't do that. Even if we got rid of Tyreek, that's still $10,000 left per player. You get a more balanced lineup this way, but you're not going to leave out Tyreek, right? Do you really want to enjoy the game and leave out Tyreek or your low-risk lineup? No, you don't. But if you just look at projections and more balanced builds being better on FanDuel for low-risk contests, this is the way you have to do it. I just wouldn't recommend it. I would just say use your low-risk allocation on DraftKings today and go on about your day. Tricky Ricky, great name, says, is Waddle going to be a good pick today? Yeah, Waddle is. We like him. The Jets are difficult to pass on. However, this is Miami that we're talking about here. And you imagine the attention is going to be on Tyreek Hill. And Waddle could go overlooked a little bit. And we'll talk about more of this in the captain selection section here in a little bit. But you look at Jalen Waddle, if I can find him on the screen, is $9,600. Pretty pricey when you consider Mostert, Tua, Tyreek, and even Garrett Wilson by most projection systems rate better than him. So he'll have the lowest ownership of this bunch, which by default makes him a pretty good pivot in high-risk contests. Sean says, any chance the Jets shut down Hill like they did to Diggs a couple of weeks ago? If so, Shakir at wide receiver 3 went off. Who would be that player on Miami this week? Michael's asking Robbie Chosen, Claypool, Berrios, Wilson. Where do we go after the big 2? So this is kind of a similar question. It's been Cedric Wilson that has been running the wide receiver 3 routes for the most part recently for Miami. Let's scroll down here. Cedric Wilson, $2,600. He's been their wide receiver 3. He's really stepped up. A guy I thought would be the guy anyways at the beginning of the season. Dealt with a couple things. He's now basically that guy over Berrios, over Chosen, over Craycraft. So Cedric's that guy. Now, the question of can they shut down Tyreek Hill? Yes, we think most teams will try to do that. But given this offensive system, their play designs, how they get the ball in Tyreek's hands, their motion, his speed, to his connection with him, it's a lot easier said than done, no matter who your corners are or your defensive system. So yes, they have been shutting down wide receiver 1s, but this is a situation where it is a lot more difficult than it is for Stephon Diggs, where they just line him up outside and make him run routes, whereas opposed to Tyreek's running all around the field. Defensive confusion. It's a lot easier for other teams than it is for teams that have these incredible play designs. All right, so let's talk about some more high-risk strategies here. So leagues, GPP satellites, got to be a lot of people to win a lot of money. Just for the record, our projected ownership is up in our model, in our lineup builder, OccupyFantasy.com. Links are in the description. Those will be updated one more time once we get in actives. Our daily plug, we do have a daily plug for Friday up with rankings for both sites for different contest types, lineup construction tips for individual contest types, and more slate notes. Make sure you go check that out. Link is in the description. Our writer Bismo did a great job with that. If you read better than you listen and absorb information, go check out the daily plug after this is over. We'll be here till 1:30 or so. That'll give you enough time to digest and make some more lineups. So let's get the mic out of there. Let's get the water intake. Tony says, do you see a lot of 4-1 Dolphins lineups at high risk for this game? Do you think that's optimal? Optimal? Yeah, that's going to be the prevailing tactic by the field. 5-1 on DraftKings, 4-2 on DraftKings, 4-1 on FanDuel. Because let's be honest, who wants to play Tim Boyle? Who wants to play anybody on a team that is captained by Tim Boyle, right? And all the Miami guys have high floors and ceilings. So that is going to be the predominant strategy by the field. As we say many times in these videos, if you want to get leverage over the field, construction is a great way to do it without sacrificing too much. So you could play multiple Jets in your lineup. We already talked about the youth revolution for the Jets, playing one or two of those guys in addition to Boyle or Brees Hall or Garrett Wilson, which, by the way, Garrett Wilson is one of our underperforming wide receivers for Week 12. So that gives him a little more boost in our model. But yeah, Miami heavy builds are going to be popular. If you want to get freaky and play some Jets heavy builds or just more balanced, the field is not going to be doing that. Jose says, can you rank the Jets wide receivers? Okay, I can certainly do that. It is Garrett Wilson at the top, and then it is a long, heavy drop off to Xavier Gibson at $800. And then it is an even greater drop off to Brownlee and Irvin Charles, who are high risk, large field plays only. Gibson, you can play in low risk contests if he's going to run 35 routes at $800. Wilson, you can captain as an underperforming wide receiver and a low owned pivot on an underdog offense. So it's pretty clear, honestly. It is Garrett Wilson by far, then it is Xavier Gibson as a great value, and there's the other two guys as large field dart throw pivots. Sheets. Oh, what's up, Sheets? Very rarely make it on here live. Usually catch it on replay. Just shouting out to keep the great work across all your content. Sheets, appreciate you. Thank you. Thanks for reaching out. Always love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. Glad you could tune in live. Appreciate it. If you got a question, let me know. Zachary says, Tim Boyle, captain YOLO. So better you than me, Zachary. Let's say that. All right, with the Jeff Wilson pricing, this is another strategy and concept to think about. So Jeff Wilson, $1,800 with all the Jets players, Rucker, the running back, Abanikanda, the receivers. All these guys in these roles can outscore guys that are priced $5,000 more than them, $6,000 more than them. So if you're hand building, it may look weird to leave $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 left over. If you play the Dolphins defense, even more so. We know lineups that include a defense historically use less salary. It may look gross, but this is the type of slate where you can leave a lot of salary, and I would be shocked if the winning lineups on both sites, especially DraftKings, FanDuel is a little tighter with the pricing, but on DraftKings especially, didn't leave at least $1,000, but probably more as far as the optimal lineup goes. So leaving salary is a great way to do it today. The field won't do it as much. They'll jam as much as they can. But if you play Wilson, especially because he's going to be so popular, we have him at 40% plus in most contest types. If you play Jeff Wilson, don't be afraid to leave $2,000 or $3,000 because historically that would allow you to upgrade to a better position. But Wilson, if you add, let's say you add $3,000 to his salary, that means you wouldn't be able to play Lazard, who's inactive, Cook, who's going to outscore, Jets defense against the Dolphins offense, and then tight ends and random wide receiver 3s and 4s. Can he outscore those? Yes, easily. And you could probably even make the case that he could outscore Tim Boyle at $6K, an extra $4,200. So salary usage is going to be big today. Do not be afraid to leave it on the table. And if you're using our lineup builder or whichever optimizer you prefer, I would really lower that salary floor to see what kind of lineups you get at the end. You can always tighten it up afterwards, but don't start with 49K or 48K on DraftKings. Start at literally 40K and then work your way back up. JP says, thoughts on Hall? Yeah, Hall. So Brees Hall is still not getting like this massive workload that we expect and has been getting bailed out a bit on some of these receiving touchdowns, but still extremely talented. Still a guy that we like. Still a guy that's in he's talented in a role that makes him viable for showdown contests, obviously. I'll talk about him a bit more when we talk about our MVP strategy here in a second. Chris in the chat, Friday afternoon game started by Tim Boyle. Preseason is back. Yes, it is. That is, those were the days. We had this just 3 months ago, and now we're back in November with it. So, all right. So I mentioned the Dolphins defense, talked about that strategy a little bit. You can captain them if you want. They will be more popular than historically defenses have been, but just make sure you leave salary. Make sure you use lower owned players because it's not going to be a novel idea that the field is missing out on. All right, now for this captain MVP strategy. We have for DraftKings, Tyreek and Tua combining for about 45 to 50% of the captain ownership. That is much higher on FanDuel for the MVP spot. Both these guys are going to eclipse probably combined 70%, maybe even 80%, depending on the contest you're playing. So if you've been watching our videos the past few weeks, you know what the strategy is going to be when we have this type of dichotomy. If you have Tyreek and Tua accounting for most of the ownership, you have two ways to play it. First way is to go all in on both of those guys. So you play half your lineups with Tyreek, half with Tua, maybe 60-40, 70-30, whatever you want to do, right? But get overweight on both of them. Go all in on those guys, and then rotate in lower owned pieces, which Fortunately, we do have today, right? There are some slates where we just don't have any plays that are legitimate that are less than 20 or 10% owned. Here we have all the Jets guys. We have the rotational wide receivers behind Tyreek and Waddle. We have the tight ends for Miami. We have Jeff Wilson's not going to be low owned by any means, but can save salary. So lots of ways to get different if you play Tyreek or Tua at MVP. So I think it's a very viable option to go all in on those guys on both sides at captain and play them. Now, if you're more risk tolerant, you're looking for less duplicates, you don't like the trashier plays, the lower owned plays, what you should do is completely fade Tyreek and Tua at MVP. And it seems risky to do so because 80% of the field is going to do it. But just imagine if they're not the highest scorer and it's Mostert. We've seen him score 40 points in a game this year. If it's Brees Hall, we've seen him have big games. Garrett Wilson, underperforming wide receiver, or Jalen Waddle, if the defense does focus on Tyreek Hill, like someone in the chat said, and Waddle is the biggest beneficiary, and he scores the most points on the slate. All these guys under 10% projected ownership at MVP on FanDuel. You're competing with a lot less people if you get that right. So I think having an MVP player pool of those guys and then mixing and matching, evenly distributing or relatively between those guys, really great play. And the same goes for DraftKings. Now, they're not going to be as low owned because of the salary multiplier and because of the scoring system on DraftKings, but playing Mostert, Waddle, Garrett Wilson, Brees Hall, maybe Boyle if you're crazy. I don't think you need to. I don't know. I'm not sure how high his ceiling could possibly be. But playing the secondary guys outside of Tyreek and Tua is going to be massive leverage at captain and MVP tonight, especially on FanDuel, but DraftKings as well. All right, let's see here. So Devon Achane is officially out. It sounds like, well, people in the chat are asking about, but yeah, he's not going to play. It's going to be Mostert. It's going to be Jeff Wilson. It's going to be Darrington Evans, who again is not in the player pool. All right, that wraps it up. I think we covered everything that I had in my note sheet. Let's get some final questions from you guys. Don't here. We got 200 people watching, so I know you guys have some questions. Let's see them. I'll stick around here till 1:25. Let's rapid fire these questions. I will answer them. In the meantime, make sure you check out the daily plug after this video ends. The link is in the description, occupyfantasy.com. A little over $7 a week if you're not a member already, but lineup construction tips for different contest types. You're playing a 100-player league on FanDuel. Brian, how should I build that lineup? Plug's got you covered. Who's the best captain for DraftKings high-risk small field? Got you covered. Bismo, our writer, did a great job. Go check it out. The model's up and will be updated here in the next 30 minutes with ownership updates and inactives projections. So let's see. Brand. What's one more way to gain leverage other than roster construction? It is leaving salary today and it is playing multiple low-owned players, which we have a handful of. So certainly different ways if you're not into the Jets onslaught or the Jets lineup construction strategy. And I don't blame you. Believe me. Those are two other ways to get different today. DeFilthy, great name. Missed second place in the big one FanDuel by one play last night. Played Dobbs versus Reed. That is extremely painful. We're familiar with that feeling. Let's get first place for you, DeFilthy. Tehran says kickers. Good question. So we think Sanders will be somewhat popular, 20% plus, despite the $5,400 price tag, which is crazy. Zerline, they finally priced him up. Both Zerline and Will Lutz have just been dominating as underdog kickers in primetime showdown contests lately. So I imagine he'll get a little bit more than he probably would as a typical touchdown plus underdog. But both guys are in play. I think I prefer Stars and Scrubs. But yeah, both kickers are in play. We got Sanders a little higher owned than Zerline. And Zerline, I imagine, will eventually stop kicking 5 field goals per game. Will it be on the Friday afternoon showdown slate? We'll see. Let's see here. More questions. Sant says Hall or Dalvin Cook. I mean, Brees Hall is by far better than Dalvin Cook as far as usage and everything else goes. So, Zach says Dolphins D running back with Boyle. Is that crazy? No, definitely not. Definitely not crazy at all. It's a great strategy on short slates and especially in showdown. The idea being they get a pick 6, sacks, fumbles. He's forced to throw more. Even if he puts up 10 points, he can be optimal with Dolphins defense captain. So, no, I don't think it's crazy at all. Tony says, how do we make out on those 4-2 stacks yesterday? Yeah, we got murdered completely. It was possibly the worst slate imaginable for mega stacks on short slates. All the chalk went off. Blowouts. Too many, 2% owned guys. I'm thinking Turpin, Dowdle, those types of guys scored. It was just a disaster if you play that strategy. That's going to happen from time to time. In fact, maybe more often than not. Excuse me. But we're going to keep playing those types of strategies for short slates in the future. JP says, are you going live tomorrow? Or should I ask you now how you feel about Josh Downs Sunday? I haven't looked at a single thing for Sunday, so definitely wait for tomorrow's live stream. We'll schedule that here tonight, let you know the time. Mike says, regardless of salary on DK, Conklin or Gibson? I'll say Gibson just because there is a slight potential for Rucker to lead them in snaps. We already saw Uzama get the backseat last week. I'm not saying it will happen with Conklin, but if they decide to give Rucker even more snaps, it would only come at the expense of Conklin. So I'll say Gibson snaps and targets are a little more secure. I think by most projection systems, Conklin will rate better, but I say Gibson is the better play today. Paul says Boyle 3 interceptions. Yeah, that would be in line with his career trajectory for sure. Tolga says Tim Boyle captain. I'm not going to be doing it. It would take some weird stuff for that to get there. On DraftKings, it's not too bad. It's 6K, so you can fit in maybe one more stud with him playing there. We have him 2% projected ownership at captain today. Justin Sports says, do you think it's a solo shipper today? That's a really good question. I'm tempted to believe that's the case when we have so many low-owned guys. But the margin for error is extremely thin. If Wilson is in the optimal lineup, all bets are off. We could see a big chop. So I'll say no, with fingers crossed at the end. The answer is yes. Gobbler says, does Boyle have rushing upside? Not really. He ran one time for 1 yard last week, and he's not a guy that typically runs. So he was drafted more for his size. Clearly, with his, these NFL teams think they can convert these large guys who fit the athletic profile, but just aren't good at football. This goes for a lot of positions. Tim Boyle qualified there somehow, despite his more interceptions and touchdowns in college. He's big. Teams thought they could use his size. He hasn't been any better since. So it's not because of the rushing ability. Yeah, good question about Jets defense, or not question, it's a comment about Jets defense. Tua has been known to throw some picks from time to time, fumbles. So Jets defense, a great leverage play today. We have them definitely under 20% at $3,800. So certainly one way to get different today. Inquiring Mind says, who are your top 2 plays today? For me, it's Tyreek and Tua, and I don't think that's controversial by any means. Alex says the only Jets player he'd roster is the Water Boy. If the Water Boy was $100 on DraftKings, I think that would be a great play. You just take your 0. But there's surprisingly some good plays on the Jets today. Someone's going to get the ball. Even if they lose 40-0, some guys are going to score at cheap ownership and cheap prices. I'm not going to play any of the cheap wide receivers or tight ends at captain on the Jets, but we talked about the low risk strategy with Jeff Wilson at captain potentially. That same concept applies. But I will say this. We see this strategy mentioned throughout the industry pretty frequently. You play a cheap captain, jam all the studs in, that you can get all the scoring. And for low risk, that's great because it gives you a higher floor. But for large field, the biggest issue with that is you need all the studs to perform. And very rarely in a game does every single stud perform up to expectations. So while it looks great in terms of raw projections, one of those studs is more often likely to fail, and you end up with 6 points at captain and a stud failing and not cashing. So while it looks good, I would say limit all your cheap guys' exposure on DraftKings to just your flex and not your captain. Tricky says, is not having Mostert in your lineup going to be a mistake? We'll know in about 4 hours here because he could either score 40 or he could score 10 like he's been scoring the last couple weeks. I'm leaning towards him being a great play today with both Ahmed and Achane out. So I think it's probably a mistake, but we've seen some weird uses with the running backs too. So who's to say? And yeah, Paul, the Conklin captain idea is the same as the other Jets guys. I wouldn't go there today with his risk of playing time not being secure and just needing all the studs to perform when usually they don't in any game environment. So, all right, guys, that'll do it. Appreciate you watching. As always, weird Black Friday edition. Not sure of everybody's schedule, but we got enough tuning in. So thank you taking time out of your day to watch this. If you want the extra edge, read our daily plug, check out our model, use our lineup builder. All those are ready for you to go. Still 90 minutes left until kickoff. Plenty of time for you to digest and make some more lineups. So if you're not already, make sure you're subscribed here on YouTube. We go live for every showdown slate and every main slate. The main slate Q&A will be tomorrow, so subscribing is the best way to get notified when we go live and when those videos are recorded and uploaded. Give us a thumbs up. We appreciate it. Any questions? It's too late now to comment on the rest of the video. Join us in our Discord server, activefantasy.com/Discord. Happily we'll answer your questions and sweat out the games with you. So Brian from Active Fantasy, thank you. And good luck in today's Jets and Dolphins showdown slate.